The Battle of Luna began at dawn on a Wednesday that would change the course of human history. Commander Steve Walsh stood in the command center of Shackleton Base, watching as Zephyrian landing craft descended toward the lunar surface like falling stars. The aliens had finally decided to secure the moon's mining facilities, expecting to face minimal resistance from the small human garrison that had been left behind during the evacuation of most personnel months earlier. What the Zephyrians did not know was that the evacuation had been largely fictional. Instead of abandoning Luna, the humans had been turning it into a fortress using methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Walsh and his team of 200 volunteers had spent 3 months preparing defenses that no sane military commander would ever consider. The moon's low gravity and lack of atmosphere had always been challenges for human operations, but Walsh had learned to turn these disadvantages into weapons. Mining charges that would have been dangerous but manageable on Earth became guided missiles in the moon's weak gravitational field. Industrial equipment designed for construction became kinetic weapons that could punch through armor plating. Most importantly, the lunar surface itself had become a tactical advantage. Walsh spoke into his headset as the first Zephyrian dropships approached the landing zones. Around him, his team prepared weapons that the aliens would never see coming. They had spent weeks laying charges throughout the mining tunnels, setting up electromagnetic pulse devices in hidden locations, and preparing surprises that would turn the moon's industrial infrastructure into a death trap. The Zephyrian landing force was commanded by General Kexaval, a veteran officer who had led successful planetary assaults on dozens of worlds. He expected the Luna operation to be routine, a simple matter of securing strategic facilities and eliminating any remaining human resistance. His intelligence reports indicated that fewer than 300 humans remained on the moon, armed with primitive weapons and trapped in facilities that could be easily surrounded. The first sign that something was wrong came when the lead dropships entered the landing zone near the main mining complex. The area appeared to be deserted, with no signs of human activity and no energy signatures that would indicate defensive systems. The Zephyrian sensors showed nothing but empty buildings and abandoned equipment. That was exactly what Walsh had been counting on. The human defenses were invisible to alien sensors because they were not really defenses in any conventional sense. They were industrial accidents waiting to happen, mining equipment rigged to explode, and construction machinery that had been turned into improvised weapons. Everything was designed to look like normal mining operations until the moment it killed enemy soldiers. The first trap triggered when a Zephyrian squad entered the main processing facility. Walsh had rigged the mineral separation equipment to explode when anyone wearing alien biosignatures came within range. The blast was not particularly powerful by military standards, but in the moon's low gravity, the debris from the explosion traveled much farther and faster than it would have on Earth. Pieces of mining equipment became shrapnel that could punch through Zephyrian armor at distances that should have been safe. More traps activated as alien forces moved deeper into the facility. Conveyor belts became kinetic weapons that hurled chunks of ore at high velocity. Storage silos released clouds of metallic dust that interfered with Zephyrian targeting systems and communications equipment. Environmental controls began flooding corridors with industrial gases that were harmless to humans in protective gear, but toxic to alien respiratory systems. General Kexval watched the reports coming in from his landing forces with growing confusion. His troops were taking casualties from weapons that should not have existed and traps that should not have been possible. The humans appeared to have weaponized the entire mining facility, turning every piece of equipment into a potential threat. But the real surprise came when Dr. Carter's weapon was finally deployed. The resonance cascade generator had been built into the moon's main power grid, hidden among the fusion reactors and power distribution systems that kept the base operational. When Walsh activated the device, it did not just attack the Zephyrian ships in orbit. It propagated through their quantum communication network like a virus. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Zephyrian ships across the solar system began experiencing cascade failures as their power cores entered unstable resonance patterns. The advanced technology that made the Empire's forces so powerful suddenly became a liability as energy surges traveled through quantum links and disabled vessels that were light years away from the battle. On Luna, the alien landing force found itself cut off from orbital support as their command ships struggled with power failures and communication breakdowns. The troops on the ground were on their own, fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Human defenders appeared from mining tunnels, took shots with projectile weapons that worked fine in vacuum, and then disappeared back into passages that the aliens could not follow. Back on Earth, resistance networks launched the largest coordinated uprising in human history. From London to Tokyo, from New York to Sydney, human fighters emerged from hiding with weapons that the aliens had learned to fear. The Zephyrians had prepared for energy weapons and advanced technology, but they were still vulnerable to bullets, bombs, and blades wielded by people who had nothing left to lose. Major Jenny Foster led the assault on the primary Zephyrian command ship hovering over Washington, D.C. Her team had spent months studying the vessel's structure and identifying weak points using nothing but telescopes and mathematical calculations. They had learned that the ship's main support struts were designed to handle the stresses of space travel, but were vulnerable to precise impacts at specific angles. Foster's weapon was a masterpiece of human improvisation, a kinetic harpoon built from construction equipment and launched using explosive charges. The device was crude and primitive by Zephyrian standards, but it was also invisible to their sensors and capable of punching through armor that was designed to stop energy weapons. When the harpoon struck the command ship's main support beam, it created a structural failure that brought down a vessel the size of a city. The sight of the massive alien ship crashing into the Potomac River was broadcast across the planet and throughout the galaxy. The supposedly invincible Zephyrian Empire had lost a major command vessel to humans using weapons that were barely above medieval technology. The image became a symbol of human defiance that would inspire resistance movements across the galaxy for generations to come. But the most significant victory came in the digital realm, where programmer Claire Johnson had been fighting a war that few people understood. The former computer hacker had spent months infiltrating Zephyrian networks, learning their systems from the inside, and preparing for a cyber attack that would cripple the Empire's technological advantage. Johnson's virus was a work of art that combined human creativity with alien technology. She had discovered that Zephyrian computer systems were incredibly advanced but also incredibly rigid. They followed predictable patterns and relied on stable algorithms that had worked for thousands of years. The virus introduced chaos into these systems, making them think that impossible things were happening and causing them to shut down rather than risk damage. When Johnson finally launched her attack, it propagated through the Empire's networks faster than their security systems could respond. The virus did not just crash individual computers, it erased databases, corrupted communication protocols, and deleted centuries of military doctrine and technological knowledge. Within hours, the Zephyrian Empire's forces were effectively blind and deaf, unable to coordinate their activities or access their own tactical databases. Commander Steve Walsh watched from Luna as alien ships across the solar system began to retreat in disorder. The vessels that had seemed so powerful just days earlier were now limping away from Earth, their crews struggling with systems that no longer worked properly and command structures that had collapsed when their networks failed. The victory had come at an enormous cost. Billions of humans had died during the occupation, entire cities had been destroyed, and human civilization had been fundamentally changed by the experience of fighting an interstellar empire. But humanity had proven something that would echo across the galaxy. Being underestimated was the greatest tactical advantage a species could possess. On Earth, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the ruins of what had once been the Pentagon. Watching the last Zephyrian transport ships flee toward space, the aliens who had arrived as conquerors were leaving as refugees, their empire's confidence shattered by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive and helpless. The war was ending, but Morrison knew that it was not really over. The galaxy was, full of other species, other empires, and other threats. But humanity had announced itself to the universe in a way that could never be ignored or forgotten. They were no longer a minor species on a backwater world. They were a force that could reshape the balance of power among the stars. As the alien ships disappeared into the darkness of space, Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Admiral Zektar stood in the command center of his flagship, staring at reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. The primitive humans of Earth were not only continuing to resist, but were actually becoming more effective over time. Their attacks were growing bolder, more coordinated, and more damaging to Zephyrian operations. This should have been impossible. For 6 months now, human resistance cells had been striking at Zephyrian facilities across the planet. Each attack used weapons that barely registered on alien sensors, but the cumulative damage was becoming significant. Supply lines were disrupted, communication networks were being sabotaged, and Zephyrian personnel were beginning to request transfers away from Earth duty. The Admiral pulled up a tactical display showing the latest incidents. In the past week, alone, humans had destroyed 2 supply depots, damaged a communication relay, and somehow managed to bring down a transport ship using nothing but modified mining equipment. The attack showed a level of creativity and adaptation that Zephyrian military analysts had never encountered before. Captain Jake Morrison now found himself in command of something that had never existed before, a unified human resistance movement. Representatives from cells around the world had gathered in an abandoned mine shaft in Colorado, where Dr. Carter's laboratory provided both a meeting place and a source of new weapons technology. The gathering included fighters from 6 continents, all united by their refusal to accept Zephyrian rule. Morrison looked around the room at the faces of people who had become legends in the resistance movement. Kelly Brooks sat beside Rick Hayes, comparing notes on urban warfare tactics. Paul Rodriguez worked with a team of engineers from Germany and Japan, designing new ways to disrupt alien technology. Dr. Carter presented her latest discoveries about Zephyrian weaknesses to a group that included former soldiers, scientists, and ordinary civilians who had become expert saboteurs. The strategy they developed was unlike anything taught in military academies. Instead of trying to match Zephyrian technology, they would use human unpredictability as a weapon. The aliens expected logical, efficient attacks using advanced weapons. They would get chaotic, improvisational assaults using whatever materials were available. Dr. Carter had made a discovery that excited and terrified her in equal measure. By studying captured Zephyrian power cores, she had learned that alien technology was built on principles of stability and predictability. Everything worked exactly as designed, with no wasted energy and no random variations. It was the mark of a highly advanced civilization, but it was also a weakness that humans could exploit. Humans had spent their entire history dealing with unstable, unpredictable technology. They were experts at making things work that should not work, at finding solutions that should not exist, and at turning disasters into victories. More importantly, they were comfortable with chaos in a way that the Zephyrians were not. Carter's new weapon was based on this principle. Instead of trying to build something as advanced as Zephyrian technology, she had built something that was deliberately unstable and unpredictable. The device would cause captured alien power cores to enter, cascade failure. But the exact effects were impossible to predict. Sometimes it would simply shut down alien equipment, sometimes it would cause massive explosions, and sometimes it would create electromagnetic pulses that disabled everything in a large area. The first test of the new weapon came during an attack on the Zephyrian Administrative Center in Chicago. Ray Thompson, a former police detective, led a team of 20 fighters into the building using service tunnels that the aliens had not bothered to map. They carried Carter's device, along with conventional weapons and explosives, and a detailed plan that was designed to be changed on the spot as circumstances required. The Zephyrians had expected human attacks to follow predictable patterns. They had stationed guards at obvious entry points, installed sensors to detect energy weapons, and prepared countermeasures for conventional military tactics. They had not prepared for humans who entered through the sewage system, used weapons, made from kitchen chemicals, and changed their plans every few minutes based on what they found. Thompson's team reached the main power core in the center of the building and activated Carter's device. The effect was immediate and devastating. The alien power systems did not just shut down but began to fluctuate wildly, sending energy surges through every system in the building. Lights flickered, computers crashed, and the advanced climate, control systems began producing clouds of freezing vapor that filled the corridors. In the chaos that followed, the human fighters moved through the building like they owned it. The Zephyrian guards could not use their targeting systems, their communication equipment was dead, and their energy weapons were draining power from cores that no longer provided stable energy. The humans, meanwhile, were using weapons that worked just fine in the dark and did not need computer guidance to hit their targets. The attack lasted 4 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of the administrative center. More importantly, it demonstrated that humans could not only resist Zephyrian occupation, but could actually outfight the aliens under the right conditions. Word of the victory spread through resistance networks around the world, inspiring new attacks and bringing new recruits to the movement. In occupied territories around the world, resistance fighters led by people like Ray Thompson had learned to move through urban environments in ways that confused and frustrated Zephyrian forces. The aliens were used to fighting enemies who followed logical patterns and used predictable tactics. They had never faced an enemy that treated urban warfare like a three-dimensional puzzle that could be solved in dozens of different ways. Steve Walsh, a former construction foreman, had become an expert at urban camouflage and improvised weapons. His team in what used to be Seattle had learned to hide in plain sight, using abandoned buildings and construction sites as bases of operation. They moved through the city using routes that changed every day, never following the same path twice and never staying in one location long enough for the aliens to track them. Walsh's specialty was turning civilian infrastructure into weapons. He knew how to make explosives from fertilizer and fuel oil, how to create electromagnetic pulse devices from microwave ovens and car batteries, and how to turn construction equipment into improvised artillery. His team had destroyed 3 Zephyrian outposts using nothing but stolen bulldozers and homemade bombs. The Empire's greatest mistake was becoming clear to Admiral Zektar as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Zephyrians had assumed that superior technology would guarantee victory, but they had never considered what would happen if their enemies refused to fight on technological terms. Humans were not trying to match Zephyrian weapons. They were ignoring them and fighting a completely different kind of war. The Admiral called a meeting of his senior staff to discuss the situation. The room was filled with officers who had conquered dozens of worlds, but none of them had ever dealt with anything like the human resistance. Every other species they had defeated had eventually recognized Zephyrian superiority and either surrendered or been destroyed. The humans seemed to be getting stronger and more dangerous the longer the occupation continued. Colonel Nexran, the intelligence officer, presented his analysis of recent human activities. The resistance movements were not following any known pattern of insurgency. They were adapting and evolving their tactics faster than Zephyrian countermeasures could be developed. More disturbing, they seemed to be learning from every engagement, becoming more effective with each attack. The Colonel's report included video footage from recent battles that showed humans doing things that should have been impossible. They moved through areas that sensors said were empty, appeared in locations that were supposed to be secure, and used weapons that should not have been able to penetrate Zephyrian defenses. It was as if they were fighting by completely different rules. Dr. Carter's latest project was reaching completion in her hidden laboratory. She had been working on something that would have been unthinkable before the invasion, a weapon specifically designed to exploit the Zephyrians' reliance on stable, predictable technology. The device was built using salvaged alien components and human engineering principles, creating something that was neither fully human nor fully alien. The weapon worked by introducing chaos into Zephyrian systems. Instead of trying to overpower alien technology, it confused it, making advanced computers think that impossible things were happening. The effect cascaded through connected systems, causing failures that spread from ship to ship through the quantum communication networks that the Empire used to coordinate its forces. Testing had shown that the weapon could disable entire fleets if it was used against the right target. The challenge was getting close enough to a major Zephyrian command ship to deploy it. That would require a level of coordination and sacrifice that would test the limits of human determination. Captain Morrison studied the intelligence reports about Zephyrian fleet movements around Earth. The aliens kept their most important ships in high orbit, protected by smaller vessels and defensive systems. The massive ships came from the stars on a Tuesday morning, blocking out the sun over every major city on Earth. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the space station Freedom, watching through the viewport as the alien vessels took their positions. The ships were huge, each one the size of a small city, with smooth blue metal that seemed to glow with its own light. They moved without sound through space, their technology far beyond anything humans had ever built. Jake had been in the Earth Defense Force for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The radio crackled with panicked voices from ground control, military bases, and government officials all trying to understand what was happening. The aliens had sent a message in perfect English just minutes after their arrival. They called themselves the Zephyrian Empire, and they wanted to talk. Ambassador Kethvar appeared on every screen across the planet at the same time. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large black eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. His voice was calm and polite, but there was something cold about the way he spoke. He told the people of Earth that they had been chosen to join the great Zephyrian Empire. It was an honor, he said, and humans should be grateful for this opportunity. The ambassador explained that the Empire had been watching Earth for some time. They had studied human technology, human society, and human capabilities. What they found was not impressive. Humans still used primitive rocket fuel to reach space. Their weapons were basic metal projectiles fired by chemical explosives. Their computers were slow and clumsy compared to Zephyrian crystal processors. Most importantly, humans had never even left their own solar system. Kethavar made it clear that resistance would be pointless. The Empire controlled over 10,000 worlds and had defeated countless species across the galaxy. Their weapons could destroy entire planets, and their shields could stop any attack humans might attempt. The smart choice, he said, was to surrender immediately and accept Zephyrian rule. Those who cooperated would be treated well and allowed to serve the Empire in useful ways. Down on Earth, world leaders gathered in emergency meetings. President Martinez sat in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by military advisors and scientists. The Secretary of Defense, General Adams, pulled up satellite images of the alien ships on the main screen. The vessels showed no signs of weapons, but everyone knew they had to be there, hidden somewhere within those smooth hulls. Dr. Lisa Carter watched the alien broadcast from her laboratory deep beneath the Colorado mountains. She was the head of a secret government project that had been working on advanced weapons for the past 3 years. Her team had been trying to develop new technologies that could give humanity an edge in space, but now it seemed their work was too little, too late. The aliens had technology that was centuries ahead of anything on Earth. The Zephyrians gave humanity 24 hours to decide. During that time, their ships remained perfectly still above the major cities. They made no threatening moves, but their presence was threat enough. Millions of people stood in the streets looking up at the massive vessels that had appeared overnight. Some prayed, some cried, and some simply stared in wonder at proof that humans were not alone in the universe. Jake Morrison received orders to return to Earth immediately. As his shuttle descended through the atmosphere, he could see the alien ships growing larger and larger. Each one was surrounded by smaller vessels that moved in perfect formation, like a deadly dance in the sky. The technology was beautiful in its own way, but Jake knew that beauty could kill. On the ground, the debate raged in government buildings around the world. Some leaders wanted to fight, despite the impossible odds. Others argued that surrender was the only rational choice. The aliens clearly had superior technology, superior numbers, and superior firepower. What could primitive human weapons do against ships that had traveled between the stars? Ambassador Kethvar appeared again after 12 hours, this time to demonstrate Zephyrian power. One of the smaller alien ships descended toward the ocean near Japan. It fired a single beam of blue light into the water, and the entire sea began to glow. The beam lasted only seconds, but when it stopped, a perfect circle of water 5 miles across had been turned to steam. The message was clear. The Zephyrians could do the same to any city on Earth. Dr. Carter felt sick as she watched the demonstration. Her weapons project had been developing new types of explosives and electromagnetic pulses, but nothing that could match what she had just seen. The alien beam had released more energy in a few seconds than the largest human power plants could produce in a year. How could anyone fight against that kind of technology? But something about the alien demonstration bothered her. The beam had been incredibly powerful, but it had also been perfectly controlled and predictable. It followed a straight line, hit exactly where it was aimed, and stopped exactly when it was supposed to. There was no wasted energy, no random effects, no chaos. It was the kind of weapon that an advanced civilization would build, clean and efficient, and precise. Jake Morrison landed at Peterson Air Force Base and immediately reported to the command center. The room was filled with officers and scientists all trying to figure out what humanity could do. The discussion kept coming back to the same conclusion. Surrender was the only option. The aliens had made it clear that they could destroy Earth, if they wanted to, and no human weapon could threaten their ships. As the 24-hour deadline approached, most world leaders had already made their choice. They would surrender to the Zephyrian Empire and hope for the best. A few military commanders wanted to fight anyway, but they were overruled by politicians who feared the destruction of human civilization. At exactly the same time the next day, Ambassador Kethvar appeared on screens around the world again. This time, he was smiling as he announced that most human governments had made the wise choice to join the Empire. Zephyrian administrators would begin arriving soon to help organize human society in more efficient ways. Humans would learn to serve the Empire, and in return, they would receive protection and guidance. The aliens had won without firing a shot, just as they had planned. They had studied humanity and found them wanting. Humans were weak, primitive, and predictable. They would make useful servants, but they would never be a threat to Zephyrian power. It was exactly what the Empire expected when they conquered a new world. But the Zephyrians had made one critical error in their calculations. They had never encountered a species that grew stronger when cornered, that became more dangerous when desperate, and that treated impossible odds as just another problem to solve. 3 months after the surrender, the world looked very different. Zephyrian administrators had taken control of all major governments, and their blue-uniformed soldiers patrolled the streets of every major city. The aliens had been true to their word about treating cooperative humans well. But cooperation meant following orders without question and accepting that humanity was now a servant species in the great Zephyrian Empire. Commander Rick Hayes crouched behind the ruins of what used to be a shopping mall in Detroit. The city had been largely abandoned after the Zephyrians redirected most humans to work camps where they could be more useful to the Empire. But some people had refused to go, hiding in the empty buildings and surviving on whatever they could find. Rick was one of them, along with about 200 other former soldiers, police officers, and civilians who could not accept their new reality. The Zephyrian supply depot sat in the middle of what used to be downtown Detroit. It was a collection of strange blue buildings that seemed to grow out of the ground rather than being built by conventional methods. Alien vehicles moved back and forth between the buildings, carrying supplies and equipment to other parts of the occupied territory. The depot was guarded, but not heavily. The Zephyrians did not expect any serious resistance from the primitive humans. Rick checked his watch and spoke quietly into his radio. Around the city, his team members were in position with weapons that the aliens barely considered threats. They had hunting rifles, shotguns, homemade explosives built from fertilizer and diesel fuel, and improvised devices that no military academy would ever teach about. The Zephyrians had sensors that could detect energy weapons and advanced explosives, but they paid little attention to the crude chemical weapons that humans still used. The attack began at exactly midnight. Rick's team hit the supply depot from 6 different directions using weapons and tactics that the Zephyrian computers had not been programmed to expect. The aliens had prepared for attacks by other advanced species with energy weapons and sophisticated technology. They had not prepared for humans with bolt cutters, gasoline bombs, and a willingness to die fighting. The first explosion took out the main power generator, a device that provided energy to the entire depot. In the darkness that followed, human fighters moved through the facility like ghosts, destroying equipment and supplies with simple but effective weapons. The Zephyrian guards fired their energy weapons at shadows, their advanced targeting systems confused by enemies who did not show up clearly on their sensors. Rick himself made it to the central storage building, where he planted charges made from mining explosives that his team had stolen from an abandoned construction site. The bombs were crude and unstable, exactly the kind of weapons that civilized species had stopped using centuries ago. But they worked, bringing down the building and destroying weeks' worth of supplies intended for Zephyrian operations across the region. The entire raid lasted less than 30 minutes. When it was over, the supply depot was in ruins, and Rick's team had melted back into the abandoned city like they had never been there. The Zephyrians found evidence of the attack, but could not understand how such primitive weapons had caused so much damage. Their computers calculated that the explosives used should not have been powerful enough to destroy their hardened buildings. General Vexthul received the report while orbiting Earth in his command ship. He was a veteran of dozens of campaigns across the galaxy, and he had never seen anything like what had happened in Detroit. The attack had been carried out with weapons that were barely above Stone Age technology, but it had been more effective than assaults by species with far more advanced capabilities. The general's response was swift and brutal. 3 days after the Detroit raid, Zephyrian ships appeared over the cities of Phoenix, Memphis, and Portland. The aliens gave the populations 10 minutes to evacuate, then destroyed all 3 cities with beams of blue energy. The message was clear. Any resistance would be met with overwhelming force, and innocent humans would pay the price for the actions of rebels. But the alien retaliation had an effect that General Vexthul had not expected. Instead of breaking human resistance, the destruction of 3 cities made more people angry than afraid. Across the world, humans who had been cooperating with the occupation began to question whether submission was really the path to survival. If the aliens would destroy entire cities over a single raid, maybe they were not the benevolent rulers they claimed to be. Dr. Lisa Carter watched the destruction of Phoenix from her hidden laboratory. The city had been home to 2 million people, and now it was nothing but radioactive ash. The sight filled her with rage, but it also gave her something she had been missing: motivation to continue her work despite the hopeless odds. For months, her team had been studying pieces of Zephyrian technology that had been recovered from the initial landing sites. The alien devices were incredibly advanced, but they all seemed to work on the same basic principles. The Zephyrians used energy fields and quantum effects that humans barely understood, but they used them in ways that were predictable and consistent. Paul Rodriguez, one of Carter's engineers, made the breakthrough while analyzing a damaged Zephyrian scanner. He discovered that the alien energy shields operated on a specific frequency that could be disrupted by electromagnetic pulses of the right type. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons and particle beams, but they had a weakness that could be exploited by much simpler technology. Rodriguez had been working with radar systems before the invasion, and he realized that modified radar arrays could generate the exact type of electromagnetic pulse needed to disrupt Zephyrian shields. The equipment needed was primitive by alien standards, but it was technology that humans understood completely and could build with materials that were easy to find. Meanwhile, in cities around the world, small groups of humans began to organize resistance cells. Former Marine Sergeant Kelly Brooks found herself leading a network of fighters in what used to be New York City. The Zephyrians had turned most of Manhattan into an administrative center, but they had left the outer boroughs largely unoccupied. Kelly and her people used the abandoned subway tunnels to move around the city unseen. The resistance fighters were not professional soldiers, and they did not have military training. They were teachers, mechanics, store clerks, and students who had decided that death was better than slavery. They learned to make weapons from household chemicals, to build bombs from fertilizer and fuel oil, and to move through urban areas without being detected by alien sensors. Kelly's first major operation was an attack on a Zephyrian patrol in Brooklyn. Her team used improvised explosive devices hidden in garbage cans and sewer manholes, weapons that were invisible to the aliens' sophisticated scanning equipment. When the patrol vehicles passed over the hidden bombs, the explosions destroyed 2 alien transports and killed a dozen Zephyrian soldiers. The success of the Brooklyn attack inspired similar operations in other cities. In London, former police officer Frank Wilson led a team that destroyed a Zephyrian communication relay, using nothing but stolen industrial explosives and a deep knowledge of the city's old tunnel system. In Tokyo, a group of engineers led by Yuki Tanaka built electromagnetic pulse devices that could disable alien vehicles, using nothing but parts from old television sets and car batteries. Each attack was small and caused little real damage to the Zephyrian war machine, but together they began to create a problem that the aliens had not expected. The humans were not fighting like a conquered species. They were fighting like an infestation, striking from hiding and then disappearing before the aliens could respond. General Vex Thule found himself facing a type of warfare that Zephyrian military doctrine had never addressed. The Empire was used to fighting other advanced civilizations in space battles between massive ships. They knew how to deal with enemies who had powerful weapons and organized armies. They did not know how to fight an enemy that attacked with garbage truck bombs and then vanished into subway tunnels. The first successful shield breach came during an attack on the Zephyrian command post in what used to be downtown Los Angeles. Kelly Brooks had traveled across the country to coordinate with other resistance leaders, and together they had planned an operation using Dr. Carter's research about electromagnetic pulse weapons. The attack team included Rick Hayes from Detroit, who brought expertise in explosives, and Paul Rodriguez, who had built the pulse generator that could disrupt alien shields. They hit the command post at dawn, using a combination of conventional explosives and the new electromagnetic weapon. When the Zephyrian shields failed, the primitive human weapons suddenly became deadly. Bullets that had bounced harmlessly off energy barriers now found their targets, and explosives that had been stopped by force fields now reached their intended destinations. The command post was destroyed, and for the first time since the invasion began, humans had killed a Zephyrian general. The news of the successful attack spread through the resistance networks like wildfire. For 3 months, humans had been told that fighting was hopeless, that alien technology was too advanced to defeat. Now they knew that the Zephyrians could be hurt. Emperor Kelthanos sat in his throne room on the capital world of the Zephyrian Empire, staring at reports that told the story of the greatest military disaster in the Empire's 3,000-year history. The conquest of Earth, which should have been a routine operation lasting no more than a few months, had turned into a catastrophic defeat that had shattered the Empire's confidence and military doctrine. The numbers were staggering. 47 major warships destroyed or abandoned, 3 entire fleets disabled by cascade failures, and over 200,000 Zephyrian personnel killed or missing. The primitive humans of Earth had not just resisted, they had inflicted casualties on a scale that the Empire had never experienced. Even during wars with advanced civilizations that possessed energy weapons and interstellar fleets. But the physical losses were only part of the disaster. The human virus created by the programmer Claire Johnson had propagated through the Empire's quantum networks, corrupting databases and erasing knowledge that had taken millennia to accumulate. Military tactics that had been perfected over centuries were gone. Technological specifications for advanced weapons had been deleted, and the communication protocols that held the Empire together had been compromised. Ambassador Kethvar, who had first dismissed humanity as a minor annoyance, now found himself trying to explain to the Emperor how the most advanced military force in the galaxy had been defeated by a species that still used chemical rockets and metal projectiles. The explanation he offered was both simple and terrifying. The Zephyrians had made assumptions about warfare that turned out to be completely wrong. The Empire had built its military doctrine on the assumption that advanced technology would always defeat primitive technology, that superior firepower would always overcome inferior weapons, and that civilized tactics would always prevail over barbaric methods. The humans had proven all of these assumptions false by fighting a war that followed completely different rules. Kethvar presented his analysis to the Emperor and the assembled military leadership. The humans had not tried to match Zephyrian technology, they had ignored it and fought a different kind of war entirely. They had used weapons that were invisible to alien sensors, tactics that violated every principle of civilized combat, and strategies that treated impossible odds as tactical advantages rather than reasons for surrender. More disturbing was the realization that the humans had been learning and adapting throughout the conflict. Each engagement had made them more effective. Each defeat had taught them new lessons, and each victory had given them confidence to attempt even more audacious operations. By the end of the war, they were outfighting Zephyrian forces that had centuries of experience and vastly superior technology. The final battle reports made it clear that humanity had not won through luck or accident, but through a fundamental superiority in the art of improvisation and adaptation. They had turned every disadvantage into an advantage, every weakness into a strength, and every impossible situation into an opportunity for victory. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the ruins of Geneva, where world leaders were attempting to rebuild human civilization in the aftermath of the alien occupation. The city had been destroyed during the final battles, but construction crews were already clearing debris and laying foundations for new buildings. Humanity had survived its first interstellar war, and now they had to figure out what to do next. The cost of victory had been enormous. 3 billion people had died during the occupation and the subsequent fighting. Entire regions had been devastated by alien weapons or human sabotage operations. The global economy had collapsed, governments had fallen, and society itself had been transformed by the experience of fighting for survival against impossible odds. But humanity had also gained something invaluable: respect from the galaxy at large and confidence in their own abilities. Messages were arriving daily from alien civilizations that had previously ignored Earth, offering trade agreements, military alliances, and scientific exchanges. The primitive backwater world had become a major player in galactic politics overnight. Dr. Lisa Carter emerged from her underground laboratory for the first time in months, blinking in the sunlight as she surveyed the changed world above. Her weapons had helped win the war, but she was already thinking about the challenges that lay ahead. Other alien empires were out there, some more advanced and dangerous than the Zephyrians, and humanity would need to be ready for whatever came next. Carter's analysis of captured Zephyrian technology had revealed something disturbing. The Empire had not been the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, merely one of the more aggressive ones. There were species out there with technology that made Zephyrian devices look primitive, and some of them might not be as predictable or vulnerable as the Empire had been. The intelligence reports that were beginning to arrive from other worlds painted a complex picture of galactic politics. The Zephyrian Empire had been a middle-tier power that preyed on weaker species while avoiding confrontation with stronger ones. Their defeat had created a power vacuum that other civilizations were already moving to fill, and not all of them were friendly to the idea of human independence. Commander Steve Walsh returned to Earth from Luna with his surviving team members, all of them changed by their experience of fighting a battle that should have been impossible to win. The moon had been turned into humanity's first interplanetary fortress, and Walsh was already planning similar defenses for Mars and the asteroid belt. If other alien empires decided to test human resolve, they would find Earth much better prepared than the Zephyrians had. The resistance fighters who had become heroes during the occupation found themselves facing a new challenge: building a peaceful society after spending months learning to kill efficiently with improvised weapons. Rick Hayes worked with construction crews in Detroit, using his knowledge of explosives for demolition work instead of sabotage. Kelly Brooks helped train new police forces that could deal with both human criminals and alien refugees who had been stranded on Earth. Not all of the changes were easy to accept. The human population had been traumatized by the occupation, and many people struggled with the psychological aftermath of living under alien rule. Children who had grown up during the war knew more about making bombs than playing games, and adults who had fought in the resistance sometimes found it difficult to trust any form of authority. But there were also positive changes that gave hope for the future. The experience of fighting together against a common enemy had broken down many of the barriers that had divided humanity for centuries. National governments were cooperating in ways that had been impossible before the invasion. Scientists were sharing research without regard for traditional rivalries, and ordinary people had developed a sense of global identity that transcended old divisions. Claire Johnson's work on alien computer systems had opened up entirely new fields of research and development. Her understanding of quantum networks and crystalline processors was leading to advances in human technology that would have taken decades to achieve through normal research. Within a few years, human computers and communication systems would be as advanced as anything the Zephyrians had possessed. The diplomatic implications of humanity's victory were becoming clear as alien ambassadors arrived to establish formal relations with Earth. The humans were no longer seen as a primitive species that could be safely ignored or exploited. They were recognized as a major military power that had demonstrated the ability to defeat advanced civilizations through superior tactics and adaptability. Some alien civilizations offered genuine friendship and cooperation, interested in learning from human military innovations and trading for access to human creativity and adaptability. Others arrived with barely concealed threats, warning that other empires would not be as easy to defeat as the Zephyrians, and that humanity should accept protection from stronger allies. Emperor Kelthanos made his final decision about the future of the Zephyrian Empire in a meeting that lasted only minutes. The military disasters on Earth had triggered rebellions on dozens of worlds. Other alien civilizations were moving into former Zephyrian territory, and the Empire's technological advantage had been eliminated by the human virus. The 1,000-year-old empire was collapsing, and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. The Emperor's surrender message was broadcast across the galaxy, formally acknowledging human victory and warning other civilizations not to make the same mistakes that had destroyed the Zephyrian Empire. The message became required reading in military academies across dozens of species, a case study in how superior technology could be defeated by superior adaptability. Captain Morrison received the surrender message while standing in the White House, which was being rebuilt after its destruction during the final battles. President Martinez, who had survived the occupation by leading a resistance cell in the Rocky Mountains, signed the formal acceptance of Zephyrian surrender and the establishment of Earth as an independent world with full rights under galactic law. The ceremony was simple and brief, but its implications were enormous. Humanity had joined the galactic community not as supplicants or junior partners, but as equals who had earned their place through victory in battle.